The Battle of Raseiniai is a lesser known but significant event of World War II, often overshadowed by larger and more famous battles. Nevertheless, this battle, which took place from June 23rd to 27th, 1941 on the Eastern Front in the territory of present-day Lithuania, was one of the first and largest tank battles of the entire war. It provides valuable information about the early stage of the war, the advantage of German blitzkrieg tactics, and Soviet failures. Welcome to the Interesting Documentary YouTube channel. Today, I'm presenting you with another World War II story. If you want more similar content, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and in the comments section, leave the keyword WANT. Now, enjoy watching. June 1941, Germany, having broken the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, launched a massive invasion of the Soviet Union, an operation dubbed Barbarossa. The goal of this operation was to quickly crush the Soviet army and occupy large territories of the Soviet Union. German forces were divided into three army groups: North, Centre and South. The Battle of Raseiniai took place in the attack sector of Army Group North, where the German 4th Panzer Group, led by General Erich von Manstein, was rapidly advancing into the Baltic states. The German 4th Panzer Group, armed with Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks, was effective and well trained. It moved rapidly forward, leaving Soviet defences behind. On the morning of June the 22nd, German divisional tanks stormed through the vast plains of Lithuania, split into two main groups. One was led by Baron Erich von Seckendorf, the other by Colonel Erich Raus. These two forces had a clear objective: to reach Leningrad as quickly as possible. As Raus's tank group approached Raseiniai, they were unexpectedly ambushed by Soviets from the edge of a forest. These were the first signs of an impending battle. Although the Germans were under constant fire, their advance was lightning fast. In just 3 hours, they captured the town of Raseiniai and immediately continued their assault towards the Dupsy bridges. Raus's group turned north, towards Shilova, to capture one bridge. Meanwhile, Seckendorf's tank group attacked the second bridge. By evening, both strategic bridges were in German hands. It seemed that the first day had ended in victory for the Germans. However, the Soviets had no intention of retreating without a fight. On June the 23rd, at 4 AM, Raus's tanks were attacked by a massive Soviet tank army of 700 vehicles. This was a counterattack the Germans might have expected, but not on such a scale. Despite the brutal engagement, some German tanks managed to break through the Soviet assault. Furthermore, German bombers played a vital role, successfully destroying Russian tanks from the air and providing crucial aerial superiority to the German ground forces. Around 6 PM, a portion of about 300 Soviet tanks turned towards Varnai. Soviet tanks searched everywhere for enemy tanks, but failed to locate them. It wasn't until around 10 PM that the Soviet tanks came under fire from German artillery shells. Fierce combat erupted. During this engagement, only 4 tanks returned from the entire Soviet tank unit. This was a massive loss, demonstrating the effectiveness of German artillery and the brutality of the battle. Meanwhile, early on the same day, June the 23rd, a Soviet tank division led by Yegor Solvyankin reached the Dubisa near the bridge and began an attack on Seckendorf's group. The Germans had lined up about 100 tanks along the river and prepared for defense, hoping to repel the approaching assault. However, the Soviets had heavy tanks that easily crossed the river and slowly began to climb the opposite bank. Despite the German artillery firing at them, once on the bank, they turned and destroyed the German anti-tank artillery positions in the forest. The Germans launched a counterattack, but the retaliatory Soviet fire destroyed German tanks one after another. The Germans were forced to retreat, and the Soviets began to approach Raseiniai. However, a couple of kilometers before Raseiniai, the Soviet tanks stopped. They began to run low on ammunition and fuel. The Soviets hesitated to push into the town with almost empty fuel tanks, understanding that it would be a suicide mission. While waiting for fuel and preparing for a decisive assault, the Soviet tanks concentrated and camouflaged themselves in groves and fields of grain. This pause gave the Germans vital time. Near the road that branches off towards Shilova, and Kaulikai, the Germans quickly gathered all available heavy and anti-aircraft artillery and prepared for firing. On the afternoon of June the 23rd, Solyankin's tanks again moved towards Raseiniai. This time, however, the Germans were prepared. After an intense German artillery bombardment, around 4 PM, the Soviets were forced to retreat. On June the 24th, Soviet tanks were ordered to retreat beyond the Venta River into Latvia. However, in the chaos of the first days of the war, this vital order did not reach many units. On the morning of June the 25th, it became clear that Solyankin's forces were encircled. The division commanders decided to form several assault groups from the remaining tanks and attempt to break through the encirclement. One tank group from the Solyanko division unsuccessfully attempted to break out of the encirclement on June the 25th at 6 AM. However, the main forces tried to break through Varsalishkis around 4 AM. Near Varsalishkis, Russian tanks drove straight through the lines of German tanks, with the latter turning around and pursuing the enemy. Closing in very closely and firing at the sides and tracks of Soviet tanks from about 30 meters away, the Germans stopped approximately 18 Russian tanks, one after the other. The remaining Soviet tanks were driven into the forest. They launched several more attacks, but the Germans shelled them with heavy artillery. On the morning of June the 25th, the Soviets once again tried to break through the German defences between Kautanei and Krasenai, in the vicinity of Pasil town. However, 130 Soviet tanks that advanced across an open field toward the enemy were destroyed by German heavy and anti-tank artillery fire. Although the Soviets managed to destroy a dozen enemy cannons, by 3 PM they had lost 84 tanks. Eventually, the Germans themselves began to encircle the remaining Russian tanks that had retreated into the forest, allowing only about 30 surviving Soviet tanks to break through. On the morning of June the 26th, the Germans invaded the forest where the Russian tanks were hiding and destroyed the last 9 Soviet tanks. The Battle of Raseiniai was marked by intense tank engagements. German tanks, although technologically advanced, encountered difficulties penetrating the thick armour of KV-1 and KV-2 tanks. One of the most famous episodes of the battle was when a single KV-2 tank blocking the road halted the advance of an entire German division for almost 2 days, until it was finally destroyed by German artillery and infantry attacks. This episode became one of the legends of the war. Although Soviet KV-1 and KV-2 tanks were powerful, the Red Army faced major problems. Their logistics were poor, fuel and ammunition were scarce, and communications were disrupted. Furthermore, Soviet tank crews were poorly trained, and some newer tanks even lacked full crews. For these reasons, despite individual acts of heroic resistance, Soviet counterattacks were uncoordinated and ineffective. The Battle of Raseiniai ended in a German victory. The Soviet 3rd and 12th Mechanized Corps suffered huge losses and were essentially destroyed. The Germans, although suffering losses, managed to continue their advance eastward. The Battle of Raseiniai demonstrated the effectiveness of German blitzkrieg tactics and its superiority over unprepared and uncoordinated Soviet defense. The battle revealed the superiority of German tanks in maneuverability and tactical flexibility. Despite the fact that Soviet KV tanks were better armoured, it also showed that powerful armour alone does not guarantee victory without good logistics, training and coordination. The Battle of Raseiniai was one of the first major tank battles and provided valuable lessons to both sides about the specifics of tank warfare. The Battle of Raseiniai, although is not well known as the battles of Stalingrad or Kursk, is important for several reasons. It helped shape the early image of the Eastern Front. It showed the catastrophic consequences for the Soviets in early 1941 due to the effects of Stalin's Great Purge on the army, poor preparation and logistical shortcomings. It serves as a reminder of individual acts of heroism, such as the resistance of the KV-2 tank crew, which, although they did not change the outcome of the battle, became a symbol of resilience. This battle is a reminder that war is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon, where victory is determined not only by technology, but also by tactics, logistics, training, and, of course, the human factor. This is the story of the Battle of Raseiniai. If you want more stories about World War II, leave the keyword WANT in the comments section and suggest an idea for the next video. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next interesting documentary video about the history of World War II.